The following program is a production of WMFE, Orlando, Melbourne, Daytona Beach.
Water is everywhere.
Florida is very unique. We are surrounded by ocean. We have lakes, rivers flowing throughout the community, but not all of that is usable.
And the supply of water that Central Floridians do use every day will be maxed out in less than 5 years.
2013 would be the end of new withdrawals from the Floridan aquifer.
Most agree that growth is to blame, and controversy surrounds new efforts to produce more water.
This is simply an attempt to keep growing at rates that are unsustainable. This aquifer can no longer sustain us the way we're living.
And there's an increasing backlash against companies who want to profit from Central Florida's water.
The people are very upset. They don't want the withdrawals because of the water issues we're faced with.
The consensus is that something must be done, yet each choice has consequences. So, in part 2 of our special report, we ask who or what will pay the price of our thirst.
Support for This Week is provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to WMFE from viewers like you. Thank you.
It's a common sight in Central Florida. People load up on bottled water, a convenient way to stay hydrated in the summer heat. And even though Central Florida's tap water meets state standards, some, like Sue Brown, still say bottled water is a better alternative.
My family likes it. My husband and my daughter like it especially, and my bird, I give it to him because I feel it's more pure than the tap water.
It's also big business. 9 billion gallons of water were sold in the United States last year, making it a $12 billion industry. But there's a growing backlash against bottling companies as they try to tap new sources of water, and the controversy has now reached Central Florida.
The people are very upset. They don't want the withdrawals because of the water issues we're faced with.
Groveland City Councilman Alan Sherrod is one opponent who's speaking out against a planned water bottling plant near his Lake County town. The California-based Niagara Bottling Company is setting up shop near Groveland and wants to take 177 million gallons a year from Central Florida's limited supply of groundwater, bottle it, and sell it. Company spokeswoman Honey Rand says the business model is not unusual.
Well, that's no different than any other resource. If you think about it, agriculture does the same thing. They sell us oranges and tomatoes and watermelons and all kinds of fabulous things that we like and give us a product that we need, which is food. The gas that's in our car is a natural resource that's taken from someplace else forever.
Aside from the environmental implications of plastic waste and transport costs for bottled water, locals are angry because Niagara's plans come just as Lake County residents are being told to cut back on their water use.
It sends out a mixed signal to the residents. They're like, how can we not water our yards, cut back on our watering times, and then allow a company to come in and do this large amount of ground withdrawals?
And that amount is more than Groveland provides to all of its 7,000 residents every day.
The permit they're asking for is 400,000 gallons a day. That is more than our entire city gets. So something don't add up there.
I think that the permit is several 100,000 gallons a day, which sounds like a tremendous amount of water, but if you compare it to other business uses, golf courses, agriculture, some community associations and situations, it's really, quite comparative to that.
State and local economic development agencies initially encouraged Niagara to set up shop in Lake County. But with local leaders now giving them the cold shoulder, Niagara feels like they're a victim of bad timing, because now water supply issues are on the forefront.
When these people were recruiting them, they were thinking about clean industry, good jobs, sustainability, community connections, and those kinds of things. And the challenges that we face with regard to managing water may not have been on the front burner because they're thinking about other issues.
Last November, county leaders signaled their disapproval of Niagara's plans and withdrew economic incentives which would have been worth $2.3 million. The St. Johns River Water Management District has the final say over Niagara's request. The agency should make a decision by August. Meantime, they're demanding that local utilities find new and expensive sources of water to provide to residents.
We have identified options, water supply options for them. Now, they need to pursue those and develop those. If they don't, they're not going to be able to get permits in the future.
Even as the fight escalates, work continues on Niagara's $15 million plant.
Regardless of permission or not permission, they are going to go forward with this regardless, and I don't know what it'll take to stop them.
Though it's development that's seemingly unstoppable in Central Florida, and Niagara's request pales in comparison to the water needed for tens of thousands more homes. Central Florida's growth knows no bounds, if you ask St. Cloud resident Keith Huddle.
Development needs to be slowed down, stopped, till they can figure out a different way.
Keith and his father James enjoy a small-town lifestyle near Lake Toho, but wonder what their community will look like over the coming years. One thing's for sure, they'll see big changes. These quiet meadows on the east side of Lake Toho will be turned into bustling communities with lots of homes. That means lots more toilets flushing, showers running, and sprinklers watering, putting more strain on the limited water supply.
I forget how many houses it's going to bring in. 600 or more, I guess more than that. And where's the water going to come from? They keep preaching to us that they don't have enough water.
Each and every single household, each and every office building that goes in has a demand, and there is limited supply, as we're beginning to find out.
Doug Kelly of the Florida Planning and Zoning Association often deals with these types of development issues. He says Central Florida is reaching a tipping point.
I think there's a strong possibility that we could approve developments that indeed would be beyond what we could handle in the near future. And it is up to our local officials, it's up to our state agencies to make every effort to make sure that this does not happen.
That's the issue Osceola County leaders are struggling with now, as they consider approving even more development near Lake Toho. They're projects so large they're called Developments of Regional Impact, or DRIs, because of how widespread their effect on the area will be. James Huddle lives there now. He can't understand why, on one hand, the government demands irrigation restrictions, but on the other hand, approves massive developments that will require yet more water. He says it sends a mixed message.
They're telling us one thing, but they're doing something else. What they want to do, dry up everything? They must want to dry up everything, I guess. I don't know.
Despite concerns about the water supply, the Central Florida headcount is increasing with no end in sight. In 2005, there were 1.9 million people living in Metro Orlando, and in 2010, analysts expect 2.1 million people to call the area home.
Anytime you have a greater demand, it has an effect on the supply.
Osceola County is not the only area that continues to approve the construction of new homes and businesses. These empty lots in Orange County's Avalon Park will eventually house yet more families. In all, there are another 21 proposed large developments, or DRIs, on the table in Central Florida, including Secret Promise in Lake County, the Grand Palisades Resort in Orange County, and Samuels in Brevard County. If approved, these projects will attract tens of thousands more water users to Central Florida, and they'll just be the latest in a tidal wave of new residents.
Florida's a great place to live. People want to be here. Florida doesn't have an income tax. I think we have a tax structure that kind of encourages growth.
All of the growth has forced the water supply into the forefront. Kelly says the issue has now trumped the early 90s transportation concerns with development.
When it comes to the point that we cannot turn on a faucet, obviously that's going to affect every single individual.
And as the groundwater supply runs out, alternatives are likely to be expensive. And, according to Kelly, new developments are financial time bombs. Because when those extra costs do come, they'll hit everyone's wallets, new residents and old.
The misconception is that those new homes will possibly pay for those infrastructure improvements and for new technology and that kind of thing. Well, that's simply not true. The reason is because the local utilities who obtain the consumptive use permits to be able to pull water out of the ground basically charge everyone who has a water meter the same general fee for their uses.
Water prices will probably go up. I wouldn't doubt that a bit. But we got a shortage of water, so we got to raise your prices so we can get more water from the ocean. You can hear that now.
Back to the Lake Toho area. A brand new water plant just opened. It's about 7 miles away from the county's famous bass fishing area.
This new plant can meet the vast majority of our current needs, so today's needs. So now that we have brought this plant online, this plant's producing most of the water that's going to the city.
St. Cloud's Environmental Utilities Director says the $23 million plant also solves water quality problems in the St. Cloud area. The other facilities have old equipment, which cause violations in state water rules. And the new plant is capable of fueling more growth east of Lake Toho.
From our planning approach, we certainly anticipate their development, and that's factored into our planning activities.
And when, not if, the area outgrows its groundwater limit, plans call for drawing water from Lake Toho and East Lake Toho, which is part of the Kissimmee River system.
Rules have been passed that limit utilities to their 2013 demand from groundwater. So after that time period, we'll be required to meet our water demand for our public and increasing water demand with other sources that are called alternative sources.
For the sake of the environment, state water managers have said no to the city's plans to pull water from Lake Toho. But the city of St. Cloud is already fighting in court to challenge that decision. It knows this plant needs more water to quench the future thirst of the Lake Toho communities. A court date is set for January 2009. Because of the growing importance of water in construction projects like the ones planned for Lake Toho, developers are becoming more savvy during their business deals. The original owner of the Lake Toho land donated 11 acres to St. Cloud for the water plant, just before it sold the 1,800 acres to developers.
They certainly had some benefit and some interest in donating this property related to that development, because now that the plant's right here, there's very obvious connection points to our distribution lines, so that it's easy for those homes that are in that development to have a place to connect to get their water.
In this case, where a private developer is donating land for a water or wastewater treatment plant, it basically provides an opportunity, advances the ability for that developer to tap into the system. And when you're looking at perhaps 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 acres of potential development, 11, 15 acre, 20 acre water treatment site or wastewater treatment site is really very small compared to the ability to advance your project through the regulatory system.
As more projects work their way through the system, many Central Floridians are scratching their heads, wondering when the growth will stop. Bruce Stevenson says his yard in Winter Park is proof that he practices what he preaches.
Over the last 15 years, I've gotten rid of all my St. Augustine grass, planted native plants, and I have not had to water them. I disassembled my sprinkling system about 11 years ago and have used my hose maybe 2 or 3 times a year on my azaleas.
The yard is xeriscaped. Native and drought-resistant plants now flourish in the same place his lawn used to be. It's a form of landscaping that dramatically reduces the need for water in a region where 50% of people's water use is in their yards.
you really have two choices. You can either reduce people's footprint, they won't have lawns, or two, you take people's lawn and you devote a half of it or 2/3 of it to xeriscape landscaping that doesn't require very much water.
Stevenson is a professor of environmental studies at Rollins College and is also a board member of myregion.org, a coalition that tackles growth issues. Part of his job is to look at Central Florida's future, and increasingly that's involving the water supply.
Water is the source of life, right? And the same question, should we save oil? Yes. Should we save water? Yes.
He admits that growth is straining the water supply, but says stopping it is unrealistic.
We have no choice, essentially. People are going to come to Florida just like they have been for the last 50 years, and nothing's going to stop that unless we put up a Great Wall.
While more homes continue to go up in Winter Park and other parts of Central Florida, over in California, development is being halted. For the first time, lawmakers are saying the seriously stretched water supply just cannot sustain any more growth.
California they deserve to have water problems. They get 14 to 20 inches of rain a year. Think how bad we've screwed it up when we get 52 inches of rain a year. California's laws are similar to ours in that you have to have a dedicated water supply to allow for new growth. What's happened in California is they don't have enough water over a 20-year period to provide for new growth, so new growth is not being allowed.
That's not likely to happen in Central Florida, according to Stevenson. He believes our local governments are powerless to stop growth.
Growth will occur, but we'll have to grow in a much smarter manner, and we'll have to grow up rather than out, and we'll probably have to get used to having less private space and more public space.
Local governments may also be enticed to allow growth because it generates revenue. Stevenson says taxes weigh heavily on development decisions.
Property tax is always involved, but the idea was that growth would pay for itself doesn't make sense.
So, if growth in Central Florida can't or won't be stopped, then the question is, what will Central Florida's water supply look like in the future? Many Central Floridians take water for granted, but most water management experts agree that attitude must change.
2013 would be the end of new withdrawals from the Floridan aquifer, which traditionally has been our primary source of drinking water in Central Florida.
Regulators say they simply won't allow Central Florida to continue to take more and more water from the ground, as we have done for so many years. They say the consequences are far too severe.
We're already starting to see environmental impacts, particularly in western Orange, western Osceola, where we have very sandy soils. We have a very good connection between the Floridan aquifer and the surface water environments, starting to see damage to wetland systems.
That's why we're even talking about the need to develop new water supplies so that we can protect the environment.
Among the new water supply projects, contested plans to take water from the St. Johns and Kissimmee River systems. It's one way to fuel future growth in Central Florida, and it's the next cheapest option over groundwater, according to those backing projects to create alternative water sources.
The one impact is that those other sources are harder to treat, and in general they're more expensive. So as we have to develop those sources, it is likely that the cost of new water is going to go up.
Cost and serious environmental concerns aside, getting water from rivers and lakes may not be a sustainable long-term solution. People in the Atlanta area are finding this out. Lake Lanier is running dry as millions of people continue to use its water during a severe drought. But Florida does have access to another water source, one that's in plentiful supply. The ocean is rising on the priority list of local water managers as they predict all other available sources of drinking water will be exhausted.
If Florida continues to grow, for decades to come the way it has, I think that you will see ultimately some seawater desalination projects like they have down in Tampa Bay right now.
Tampa Bay is home to the country's largest desalination or desalination plant. It's here that tens of millions of gallons of salt water a day are sucked from the Gulf of Mexico, purified and piped to homes and businesses. The plant officially opened at full capacity earlier this year. During years of construction, Tampa's water provider learned the hard way that desalination is not cheap and it's not easy. 3 bankruptcies plus other financial and technical problems left the project about 6 years behind its original schedule and more than $80 million over the original budget. And it's not cheap for users either.
Big difference. It takes many more times the energy to take that salt out, and the energy is the cost.
For example, in Tampa, purified seawater costs 7 times more than groundwater. Conservative calculations from an industry group paint another picture. An average family living on the coast pays around $30 a month for groundwater. That same family could pay $96 a month using purified seawater. But none of this is deterring DeLand, Leesburg, Mount Dora, and Marion County from collaborating with Flagler County on plans for a $1.3 billion desalination plant in Palm Coast. Early estimates show that Central Florida families who live further inland will pay even more because of the distance the water has to be pumped.
Who's going to pay for that? That, including the electricity, insurance, everything, it's going to be tough. It's going to be like that. People have to pay $150, $175 for the water bill.
Dan Williams lives in Longwood. He's aware current supplies won't last forever, but worries about the costs of alternatives.
Water is going to become very expensive, and that's my biggest concern, because water is going to be available, it's just how much it's going to cost.
James Huddle of St. Cloud shares the concerns about the cost of desalination, but just finds the whole idea ridiculous.
Go spend all that money dragging that water clear over here from the ocean? Ha! I just laugh at that. Just give that one big laugh.
And it's no joke for environmental activists either.
Desalinization has some issues that we need to address.
While St. John's riverkeeper Neil Armajon doesn't want water pumped from the river, he also has serious concerns with desalination plants.
One, it uses a great deal of energy. We all know the cost of energy is skyrocketing. And it produces something called a concentrate that is a pollutant. It can be managed, but we can't just simply say, okay, we're just going to start taking water from the ocean.
These concentrates are usually returned to the ocean, but they contain so much salt that they can cause dead zones, large areas of the ocean where marine mammals, fish, and even plants can't survive. Amid all of these concerns, almost everyone agrees that something must be done.
Now, even if you slow the growth rate, you still are going to have increases in water supply need in the future. You just may push further out, the need to develop some of these more expensive sources.
And one thing's certain, Central Florida families will pay the price one way or another. Over in Winter Park, Bruce Stevenson says our water situation means more restrictions are inevitable for our area.
Maybe the single biggest thing is we're going to have to quit worshiping St. Augustine grass. 50% of our water goes towards trying to make Central Florida look like Central England.
He says that local governments may lower the hammer on water abusers by tightening irrigation policies and increasing fines. The St. Johns River Water Management District has already proposed stronger rules. The agency held public hearings about a proposal to cut back irrigation to just 1 day a week in the winter. Right now, 2 days are allowed. More restrictions are also on the table for golf courses and recreation areas. If approved, the rules will be in place by March 2009. Part of the issue is that builders and homeowners associations must be on board with water restrictions. Utilities in Osceola County are now working with state officials on the Water Star program, requiring new developments, like those planned for Lake Toho, to use water-saving building techniques. In terms of future development, regulators say it's a small step, yet it's in the right direction.
Water that you and I could use to drink or bathe or cook with will not be allowed to be used to irrigate lawns. And with a new development, particularly developments of that size, it makes good sense, and I think you're going to see more and more of that.
Sherry Williams is among the minority of folks who police themselves with water usage.
I just worry about the usage, the overusage. And people aren't careful. People overwater, people don't, people still wash their cars, people don't think take it seriously. I wouldn't mind having more restrictions.
That's exactly what could happen in Orange County. Utilities Director Jackie Torbert said she's stepping up enforcement. State officials are happy to hear it.
I think we are getting to the point where 50% of domestic water use for outdoor lawns is becoming unacceptable.
But something we must accept. There is a price for our thirst. WMFE's in-depth coverage continues online. Log on to WMFE.org/thisweek to watch this program again. You can also sign up for our video podcast and RSS feed. That's on WMFE.org/thisweek.